Kathy Ashford. Moi! Chapter 4. The highway grew steadily busier as we travelled northwest towards Lille, and our pace slowed considerably with the increased traffic on the highway. We managed to find wayside inns to stay every night, each one showing signs of being close to the capital. Each had more travellers staying, the food was richer, the beds more comfortable. With so much more population and evidence, Charlie and I were not remarkable, and though we had excellent service everywhere we stayed, the innkeepers were too busy, almost distracted, to afford us the congeniality we had been shown by Mer Rudy. Nevertheless, by the end of every evening in the common rooms of these highway inns, Charlie had gathered around him groups of other travellers eager for his stories and the gentle fun of his company. He continued to amaze me with the easy way he seemed to slot into the company of any given tavern. Since the incident with the bridge guards, however, he had started placing protective barriers on the doors and windows of our room, just in case. Just in case of what? I wondered, but didn't ask. Surely people wouldn't try to break into our rooms, but I didn't want to seem naive. On the 9th day of our travels, Charlie woke me early, before dawn. I protested and rolled over, desperate for more sleep, but he was insistent. "Come on, kiddo. If we leave now, we can get to Lille by nightfall." We were almost there. Charlie's excitement was contagious, so I struggled out of bed, packed my things and ate a quick breakfast, and our horses were saddled and ready to go by the time the sun was reaching pale fingers of light across the hills. We rode steadily all morning. It was a clear, beautiful day, a hint of a breeze rustling the leaves of the groves of trees nestled in the small valleys, their topmost leaves touched gold by autumn. At lunchtime, we came across a small temple of Queen Lilbich, and we dismounted and led our horses through a verdigreed copper gate to be met by a young, bald, yellow-robed acolyte. As I had told Charlie, our family never had much to do with the temple at home, so I was unsure as to how to proceed, but he bowed to her respectfully, so I followed suit. "Welcome, friends. Let me take your mounts. You must be weary from your ride." She gestured that we were to enter the temple as she led our horses around the side and tethered them close to a small pool. Inside, my eyes took a while to adjust after the bright sunlight outside, but Charlie moved unerringly forward. Branches of candelabra glittered around the outside and down the central aisle, while above, beautiful round windows of coloured glass glowed. Rows of benches faced a large altar at the front, and behind that on a high pedestal stood a statue of a bald woman, clearly Neathi, the word "remember" inscribed clearly on the stone sash draped across his shoulder. Queen Lilbich was not a goddess, nor even really worshipped as such, but she had been the leader of the Leaving, persuading the rest of her race to leave their subterranean homes to aid the war and poverty-stricken humans of the outside, in the end sacrificing her own life for peace. The Neathi had realized upon the Leaving that religious divisions and dogma had caused insufferable harm to human society. They themselves had followed no particular religious belief in the enclaves. Their gloriously long lives rendered desperate notions of eternal salvation irrelevant, and death was considered an honour, a peaceful release. But Queen Lilbich and her followers recognized an innate need in humans for ritual and spiritual purpose, and had set out 8 seasonal festivals for giving thanks and measuring the cycle of the year. After her death, Queen Lilbich's followers had dedicated the order to her memory, and now, some 600 years later, men and women of all ages and classes shaved their heads and entered the temple as acolytes. Along with the celebration of the festivals and regular Sunday services of gratitude, the temple provided succour to the poor, as well as being centres for solistry, healing using Hjaven, and midwifery services. The festival of Ludnasad had been celebrated shortly before Charlie had turned up at Jailshead, but the temple's altar was still festooned with sheaths of wheat and dolls fashioned from corn. Charlie and I sat on the front bench, and he was silent for a while. "What are we doing here?" I asked quietly, lowering my voice in the still air. Charlie gestured at the statue. remembering. He paused, thinking. And giving thanks. So we sat in silence, contemplating, until the acolyte entered the temple and walked down to us. Would you care for some refreshments? Charlie glanced at her and smiled. Yes, thank you, sister, that would be most kind. She bowed her head and motioned for us to follow her. She led us out a side door and through the exquisitely proportioned garden of the temple, sparkling with life in the midday sun. At the rear of the garden she sat us at a table shaded by trees and disappeared into a small adjoining hall, returning with a platter of bread, smoked fish and pickled vegetables, along with a large pitcher of juice. She surprised me by sitting with us, pouring the juice into elegant glass goblets. You are a mentor? She asked Charlie, who nodded, his mouth full of food. She turned her attention to me. So, you must be Niathi blood. Have you given any thought to what you'll do when you've finished your training? I almost choked on my mouthful at the unexpected question. I hadn't even considered what would happen after this academy business had been completed. I guess I'll be going home. To be a lord, I offered lamely. Her laugh was a merry chime. Well, if you want to go into the healing craft, new solace are always welcome at the temple. She grinned at Charlie. Well, it was worth a try. Charlie laughed. He's got plenty of time to figure out what he wants to do and what he'll be good at. His tone became serious. But thank you. It is always good to know there are those who appreciate our gifts. She nodded, equally serious. Those in the service of Our Lady do not fear that which is alien to so many of us. Indeed, we are grateful. She raised her goblet. To patience, tolerance, and love. And we toasted the memory of Queen Lilbech as the sun glittered down through the trees. Later, back on horseback heading towards Lil, I remarked to Charlie, That was a bit weird. What? The temple? Yeah. Didn't pick you for the religious type. Charlie smiled and nodded. The Niathi remember the Queen for perhaps different reasons than humans. For us, the leaving was not that many generations ago. Oh yeah, I suppose so. We really didn't have all that much to do with it at home. At this he laughed. Yeah, I figured. Your father didn't seem all that enamored with the Niathi. This was true, I guess, though it had never occurred to me that my father was a racist, even though before Charlie I'd never met any Niathi before. Don't worry, JJ. You'll find Lil to be much more cosmopolitan. And the Academy strongly encourages Bloodkin to go to services every week, so you should get used to that. He caught my grimace and laughed again. Come on, it's not that bad. The temples are nice, and it's good for you. You'll see. The highway ran right beside the road now, and up ahead... The highway ran right beside the river now, and up ahead I could see the road cutting between two low green hills, and I could make out the distant sparkle as it poured into Lake Nello. We're almost there now, it's just on the other side. Charlie pointed towards the hills. Squinting, I could just see the towers atop the right-hand hill, the dark grey slate glinting in the afternoon sun. The near slopes were thickly carpeted with orchards of fruit trees, and the flat land to the right of the highway was rich and green with intensively farmed vegetables. I was suddenly nervous. Here was the city of which I had heard so much about, the city that was to be my home for the next 2 years, but in reality I knew hardly anything about it. What if it was too different from home? What if I hated it? We had pushed so hard on our journey, and I had been so distracted by Charlie's company that I had hardly imagined what life would be like when we finally got to our destination. My insides clenched with nerves as we passed between the hills and turned north, and suddenly, there it was. The jail spilled into Lake Nello, which was so long I couldn't see the far side. Blanketing the north shore of the lake and stretching up onto the hills were row upon row of buildings, the same grey slate of the towers, bathed in golden sunlight. They were punctuated by more towers, spires of the temples and Nello pillars of hearth smoke. An island in the eastern corner was topped by a huge ancient castle that looked rather boarded up, and was joined to the city by way of a great arched bridge. Further along the shore, the wharves of the docks stretched into the lake. I thought Jaleshead had been a big town, but this was huge. I realized I had stopped to gaze in awe when Charlie pulled up beside me. Pretty cool, huh? I could only nod, my throat feeling a bit constricted. Charlie pointed to a group of large, graceful buildings made of darker stone near the bridge to the castle. That's the academy where you'll be studying. And over there? He pointed to an area further down the shore, where a large area of tall buildings made in the same dark stone clustered together. That's the Neathi Quarter, where the hall is. That's where we'll be living for the next 2 years. I gulped. Well, we'd best get a move on if we're to make it before the sun sets. Charlie cackled and urged his horse to a canter. Come on, Jazz. Let's go home. The sun had indeed set by the time we made it into the city proper. The small cottages that lined the road had given way to grand houses packed tightly together. And the people! I had never seen so many people in one place at the same time. They walked or rode or tended the beasts that pulled their carts, and traffic was busy in both directions. I lost sight of the lake as the buildings grew taller and closer together, and Charlie guided us down what seemed like a maze of streets, all cobbled with the grey slate. Daggers of late sun sliced through gaps in the buildings as it set, and I thought I caught a glimpse of the castle perched atop its rocky island. We pressed on through the main roads as the sky darkened, and it felt as if we were heading back towards the lake. Guardsmen in pairs walked the streets, lighting torches hung from the walls or high posts at the many crossroads. Then we turned left at one of the crossroads and faced a huge arch of black marble that stood over the street. Here we are, Jazz. The Neathi district. Home. We dismounted and led our horses underneath the arch, and all of a sudden it seemed like we were in a different city altogether. These were the buildings I had seen from the other side of the lake, darker than they had appeared in the afternoon. But what I hadn't appreciated from a distance was how tall these buildings were, at least 4 or 5 stories high, many topped with towers or spires or achingly tall chimneys. The streets here were narrow indeed, and it was dark. Hung over us on lines stretched between buildings were awnings of beautifully coloured fabric, flapping gently in the evening offshore breeze. Not much sunlight would filter through during the day, I figured. Even now, as I craned my head to take in the grandeur of the place, I could only see fragments of the sky, beginning to twinkle with stars. Down on the street, the doorways were lit not by torches, but by curious glass globes set in brackets that glowed red and green and yellow. If I had found the rest of the city confusing, the Neathi Quarter really was a maze. Pathways twisted off like tunnels. With the high buildings leaning over the road, I felt almost claustrophobic, as if we were underground. Turning a final corner, we found ourselves in front of a massive door, liberally illuminated with the light globes. I ran my hand over the smooth surface of one, surprised that the glass was cool to the touch. Humans call them globes, Charlie informed me, as he handed over his reins and pulled a chain to the side of the door. I heard the clanking of a bell somewhere inside the massive edifice. Slowly the great door creaked open, and a huge pair of red eyes blinked out at us. Greetings! My name is Kaya Schletch of Leshka of the VO Enclave, mentor to Jasseth of Jaleshead. The other Neathi stepped out into the glow and grasped Charlie's hands firmly. Kayosh, my dear boy, welcome. The surprise and delight was evident in Charlie's face as he enveloped the other Neathi in a bear hug. Yevgenia, ha! You've been a long time away from little boyo. I'm matron of the hall now. As she pulled back from the embrace, I got a better look at this other person, only the second Neathi I'd ever seen. She was not as tall as Charlie, but still taller than me. She wore Neathi-style robes in a bright, clear blue that draped gracefully around her ample figure. She turned to regard me as she offered her hand. I am Yevgenia Endochelia of the Hyayo Enclave, although I understand Neathi is a difficult language for humans to pronounce, so you may call me Eve. I smiled at the now familiar Neathi greeting and shook her hand as I studied her face. She had the same oversized eyes as Charlie, but her large red irises were perhaps more orange. Her cheeks were plump and deep lines stretched out from her eyes and around her generous mouth. I was surprised to see her skin was a different colour to Charlie's as well, a slightly purple dove grey compared to his bluish slate colour. Jesseth, dear, welcome to Lil. I trust your studies here will prove fruitful. She noticed our horses behind us. You must be bone-weary, and hungry too, no doubt. I'll get one of the boys to tend to your things while I sort you out some dinner. She stuck her head back inside the door and shouted something in Neathi, the volume coming from the motherly woman startling both me and the horses, who stepped nervously behind me. It didn't take long before I could hear the sound of running feet, and a Neathi youth appeared behind her. This is Staviosh Hyaselya of Hyayo. The youth dipped his head nervously as Eve introduced him. Staviosh, dear, this is Kaish Letcher and Jesseth. Please, take their horses around to the stable and bring their belongings to the room. The youth nodded and took the reins from me, leading the horses around a corner and out of sight. Eve shrugged and sighed. Fresh out of the Enclave, that one, and still quite terrified of humans. She shook her head. You won't believe the name he's chosen. Stephen. Stephen? Charlie caught Eve's eye and they both burst into hoots of laughter. Oh yes, dear boy. He'll learn. He sure will. Eve gestured for us to follow her inside. Now, I'll show you up to your rooms and get you something to eat, you poor starved boys. Then you can meet the others. Her eyes twinkled. If the narrow streets outside had made me feel claustrophobic, the reception room of the hall certainly made me feel better. The roof was gloriously high, strung with chandeliers of tiny globes, more large ones set into the wall. They gave off a light quite different from the candles I was used to. It wasn't dark or gloomy inside, but the ambience was gentle, easy on my eyes and perfectly suited to the light-sensitive Neathi. The floor was beautiful black and white marble tiles, set out in a checkerboard pattern and polished to a higher sheen, while in the centre of the room lay a glorious soft rug, woven in intricate patterns of red and blue. A huge fire burned in the hearth opposite a large wooden desk, presumably where Min Eve did her work and monitored the comings and goings of the students. She led us up a grand marble staircase in the far corner and down a long corridor. More of the beautiful rugs covered the floors, and globes were recessed into the walls between the doors. At the end of the hallway, Eve stopped. You two are the last to arrive of this year's intake, so you get the end room, I'm afraid. She smiled apologetically. But you do get an excellent view, and I'm sure you'll find it comfortable enough. She pushed open the door and bustled through, Charlie and I trailing in her wake. We found ourselves in a small sitting room, cosily proportioned. A couch and a couple of armchairs were laid around a fireplace, which looked to be freshly lit. Desks and bookcases and a marble-topped workbench lined one wall, and our bags had been piled beside two other doors down the far end. Now, your bedrooms are through there, and your bathroom facilities are in here. Eve pointed to another door I hadn't noticed in the corner where we had entered from. I'll leave you two to get settled. Please, come up to the common room when you're ready. The stairs are just outside in the hall here. Please, make yourselves at home. And with that she was gone, pulling the door close behind her, leaving Charlie and me to survey our surroundings. The two bedrooms were identical, with just enough room for a large bed and a chest of drawers. The one on the left was closer to the fire, but the one on the right appeared to be in the very corner of the big building, and had windows in two of the walls, through which I could see the twinkling lights of the low city, and further along to where the wharves jutted out into the inky darkness of the lake. You can have this one, said Charlie, coming in behind me, noticing how I stared out the windows. I started to protest, but he cut me off. The other one will be warmer, and I'm Neathi. I get cold. Gratefully I demurred, and left Charlie to unpack most of his things in his room, and went to inspect our bathroom. There was a particularly long and deep bath, Neathi-sized, I supposed, with peculiar taps protruding from the wall. At the far end was an even more peculiar device. It was the privy, I guessed, with a generously sized wooden seat and a copper-handled chain that hung from the ceiling. Curious, I pulled the chain to see what would happen, and with a loud gush of water the privy filled, then emptied again with a gurgle of water through the pipes. "Bloody hell, Charlie!" I yelled. "There's something wrong with the privy!" He bounded in, then laughed at my confusion. "Shit, Charlie, I didn't mean to, but I pulled the chain and it just sort of flushed." I was dismayed. I had only been here 2 minutes and already I had managed to break something. But Charlie just laughed and patted me on the shoulder. "Never seen a flush toilet before, I take it." Mutely I shook my head. "It's supposed to do that. When you've, finished your business, you pull the chain and it gets flushed into the sewage system." Wow, that was a relief. But a sewage system? That seemed hard to fathom. Rightly sensing my confusion, Charlie led me out of the bathroom to one of the armchairs. "Yep, the whole city has a Neathi-designed sewer system. There are pipes that run from every house and they all go underground, through a tunnel in the hill and out to fertilise the fields on the other side." I vaguely remembered the lush crops in the field as we had rode into Lille. Was it only this afternoon? It felt like weeks ago. My confusion abated. The idea of a whole city's worth of pipes seemed a bit weird, but flushing toilets I could definitely get used to. I sat by the fire and surveyed our quarters. They certainly were cosy. Charlie would be sleeping in the room right beside me for the next 2 years. I had accepted the idea of being so close out of necessity while we were on the road, but I had thought once we arrived we would have a bit more space. "So, JJ, what do you think?" asked Charlie from the doorway to his room. "It's nice," I offered, "but it's a bit intimate, isn't it?" Charlie squeaked in surprise, then leapt over, grabbing my head in a fierce headlock and ruffling my hair furiously with his free hand. "Intimate?" he choked with laughter. "Golly gosh, Lord Boy, you really are a snob. This is more than most families have." "Oh, sod off." Embarrassed, I tried to push him off. I didn't think I was being a snob. Charlie finally gave up and stood. He must have noticed my burning cheeks and mercifully didn't tease me. "It'll be fine, kiddo. Besides, Bloodkin are always getting into trouble. This way I can keep a close eye on you." He waggled his finger at me and grinned wolfishly. "Anyway, I'm starved. Let's go see what Mineve has cooked up for us." So, how do we lock this thing? Out in the hall I realised Eve hadn't given us keys or anything, but Charlie glanced at me with a puzzled look. "Really? We're among friends here. No one's going to steal anything." I thought of the grizzled old watchman in charge of the manor at Jail's Head and grunted. "Remember the 3 S's." Charlie raised his eyebrows. "Security, security, security." "I don't get it." There's nothing much to get." Charlie laughed and shrugged. I'd forgotten how weird humans are. You care so much about stuff. I shrugged too, and we turned to go out and up the stairs to the common room when a big robed figure raced around the corner and almost bowled onto us. "Ooh, terribly sorry, He broke off. "Kyosh, you made it! Awesome!" "Gymnach, what are you doing here?" Sounding delighted, Charlie embraced the other Neathi. "Same thing as you, buddy. Mentoring. My first Bloodkin's already graduated and he's gone to the temple to be a solist. A solist! Can you believe it? I'm so proud of him." The other Neathi spoke quickly, excited, beaming at Charlie. "And you'll never guess who I'm mentoring now. A lesbian. It's brilliant." I was taken aback by what seemed to be a rather vulgar display of objectification, but the joy on his face and the pride sparkling in his eyes was genuine, and I realised he really did think it was brilliant. "She's terribly sad, though, poor dear thing. Had such a rough time at home, teenage sexuality and all that. Honestly, humans can be so cruel." He stopped and looked at me closely. "My apologies. I am Gymnatcha Hyanyash of the VO Enclave, although I understand that Neathi is a difficult language for humans to pronounce, so you may call me Jimmy." I shook his extended hand. "I'm Jasseth of a Jail's head, I offered, and he grinned. Jail's head? Kiosh, do you remember Tomnyech? His Bloodkin's from Jail's head too. His name's Talgeth, do you know him? Though I figured this was who Rudy had told us about, I had to shake my head. I really knew no one my own age from home. Oh well, it's lucky old Tommen has him. He's quite a handful. Look, you guys should go up. Yevgenia is putting some dinner out for you. I'll go get the others. They'll be dying to meet you. You're the last to arrive, you know. Yeah, so we were told. Come on, Jazz. We'll see you in a bit, Jim. You sure will. Jimmy bounded off down the hall and we made our escape up the stairs. Jim was a couple of years ahead of me in the Guild of Education. We spent some time here together when we were journeymen, Charlie explained as we climbed. The common room was appointed rather like our private quarters, but on a much larger scale. It must have taken up most of the third floor of the hall. 2 big fires burned at either end of the room, surrounded by couches and chairs. The floor and walls were covered with plush tapestries and dining tables were laid out down the middle. Along one wall stood a number of bookcases, stuffed full with texts, and the opposite wall had windows looking out over the lake. We sat at one of the tables that had been set for a meal, and Eve came through a swinging door from what must have been the kitchen, carrying 2 plates of food and a bottle of wine. Here you go, boys. She looked at me sternly. Now, we don't have wine every night, mind, but this is a special occasion. Your first night in Lille. Without waiting for a response, she put the plates down in front of us and poured the wine. Did you see Jim Nyach on your way up? She rolled her eyes. He was so excited you were coming, Kiosh. Honestly, the energy of the boy. She sighed as if thoroughly wearied. Well, best eat up before the horde arrives. You'll get no peace when they do. And she was off, back into the kitchen to leave us to our meal. Turns out I was starving. The light lunch at the temple seemed 1,000,000 years ago, and I wolfed my food, hardly tasting it. When we finished, Charlie disappeared into the kitchen with our scraped plates. When he had returned, he refilled our glasses, and we went and sat on a couch by one of the fires. We had hardly made ourselves comfortable when the sounds of loud conversation reached us, and suddenly people started pouring into the room, Jimmy in the lead. Everyone, this is Kiosh Lercher, Charlie, and Jesseth. Jesseth and Kiosh, this is, well, everyone. We stood to greet the newcomers, but Jimmy pushed us down and came and squished between us on the couch. None of that. Now, proper introductions. I counted 14 people in the room, 7 humans and 7 Neathi, and they pulled up chairs around us and began to introduce themselves. Jimmy's Bloodkin was a small, dark girl named Lalitha. Her black hair bobbed neatly just below her ears, who would barely even look me in the eye and seemed distinctly uncomfortable as Jimmy bade her sit in a chair beside me. The 3 tall youths who grouped together were Dunkerl, Samok and Donnock, and their mentors were introduced to us as Richard, James and Adam. The other 2 girls settled on the other couch. One was plump and pretty, her long auburn hair bound in a sophisticated knot, and she smiled at me dreamily, introducing herself as Mantley. Her mentor Sarah was whippet-thin, grinning wickedly. The other girl shifted her fashionable skirts and looked around haughtily, her blonde hair falling in graceful curls around her perfect face. Her mentor Emma introduced her as Sella, and she raised her sculpted eyebrows at me, and I realized I was staring. I blushed and looked down, but was startled by a loud voice. Oi! He's from old J-Town, you reckon? Gives a look, then? I looked up at a giant of a boy, lounging casually in front of a fire. His mentor, Thomas, smiled gently. Jesseth, this is Talgeth, from your district, I believe. He spoke quietly with a deep voice, and was the oldest of the Neathi present, judging by the fine lines around his eyes. Oh, I know you! You're the Lord's boy! Shit! How did you end up here? Talgeth ran a hand through a shock of bright orange hair, mussing it into mad spikes. Talgeth, dear, language. Jesseth's here for the same reason you all are. Thomas admonished gently, but Talgeth just grinned at me. He looked a bit familiar, I suppose, but I felt completely out of my depth with all these people my own age around me. My dad's the head of the Smith school back home. I was trained to be a smith myself before old Tomo showed up. Hell, Can you imagine what I can do with this magic stuff? Hjarvan, corrected Thomas absently. I couldn't think of anything intelligent to say, so unfortunately I blurted out the first thing that popped into my brain. Head of the guild? I think I was supposed to marry your sister. Talga shrieked with laughter, earning a disapproving look from Sella, who until now had appeared disinterested, talking quietly with Mantilli. Oletha, shit, no way. Geth, language. Oh, sorry, Tomo, my bad. Oh man, Jazz, you got away lightly with that one. My sister is a total cow. Everyone laughed except me, and I felt like an idiot. Yep. I was giving off a really good first impression. I busied myself with my glass of wine. We didn't get wine with our dinner tonight, Sella complained loudly. Emma patted her on her shoulder. No, dear, but we did on our first night here too. Sella sniffed, but had the good grace to lower her head. And your classes don't begin until Monday, so maybe tomorrow night we'll indulge. The girl smiled faintly as the rest of the boys cheered Emma's words. I had totally lost track of the days when we had been on the road. My memory struggled. We'd been travelling for what, 8, 9 days? And we'd left on a Wednesday, so... Today's Friday, Charlie told me helpfully, noticing my scrunched brow. So we've got the whole weekend before you get into it. Yes, said Thomas in his rumbly voice. We have all weekend. Perhaps we'd all better get some rest. Charlie and Jesseth looked exhausted. There was a mumble of protestation, most loudly from Talgith, but nonetheless, everyone stood and began moving towards the door. Charlie grabbed the nearly empty bottle of wine, and we followed the others downstairs. On the second floor, the pairs of humans and the Athi peeled off into their private quarters down the corridor to a chorus of loud goodnights. Lalitha and Jimmy had the room next to ours, and as we opened our door, Jimmy called out, Good night, Kaish. Night, Jesseth. If you need anything, just bang on the wall. Lalitha glanced at me mournfully for a second before she disappeared inside her room and closed the door firmly behind her, and the hallway was finally silent. Alone in our rooms, I collapsed in an armchair near the fire, completely wearied but jittery with the hundreds of questions I wanted to ask Charlie as he bustled about the room, unpacking the last of his things. Charlie? His response was muffled by the bag he had his head in, rummaging around. What's with your names? You know, your human-friendly names. Ah! He retrieved the remaining items with a flourish. Well, we all know that humans can't speak Niathi. You can hardly even pronounce some of the sounds in our alphabet. So when we pass the journeyman's test... Gosh, you have to write a test? I interrupted. Yes, well, a written test is part of it, but that's all theory. The really hard part is the psychological examination. I looked at him questioningly and he rolled his eyes and explained. Yeah, there's a board of examiners who decide whether you're mature and emotionally stable enough to handle the outside. So you won't get into trouble, I suppose. It's quite uncomfortable. I pondered this for a second. With magic? Hjarvan. But yes, they poke around in your head for a bit with Hjarvan. Not a pleasant feeling, I can tell you. Huh, sounds intense. Anyway, the name thing? I prompted. Oh yeah. Charlie levered himself into the other chair. So, when we pass the test, we get to choose a human name. So, we study human text to find one that we like and that sounds a bit like our real name. But they're all so weird. Charlie cackled. Yeah, that's the good bit. So many of the texts we have are old, dating from the time of the leaving or even earlier. So the names we choose are often a bit, archaic. He grinned ruefully. But surely there are people down there who know this. Couldn't someone who's been outside tell you you're picking ridiculous names? Charlie chortled and clapped his hands. But where's the fun in that? Journeymen head outside it thinking they are oh so sophisticated with their new human names. He leaned forward and steepled his fingers together, intoning, Humility is a gift, the receipt of which is often disagreeable. And he sat back with a laugh. You're serious? Deadly. Hey, It's character building, and I'm told humans find the practice rather charming. So what's so funny about Stephen, then? Stephen? Oh, it's another word for the subject of a particularly cruel prank. Oh. I guess I could see why that would be funny for the Neathi. Maybe. Charlie leaned forward conspiratorially. Do you want to know why I chose Charlie? Go on then. Well, it sounds a bit like Kaya Schletcher, of course, but I read somewhere that Charlie is another word for snow. And snow is white, right? Like my hair. I thought I was being especially clever, but when I came outside, no one seemed to get the joke. I snorted. I don't know where you're getting this stuff, man. Charlie sighed and leaned back. Out-of-date texts. Seriously out of date. We laughed and settled into a comfortable silence as I digested this information, until Charlie yawned loudly. Hey, maybe after all this excitement we should get some rest. I'll show you around the quarter tomorrow. It'll be an adventure. Then I was yawning too. Thoughts of more adventure seemed entirely too exhausting. I drained the last of my wine from my glass and stood, Charlie following suit. He patted me on the shoulder as he headed for the door. Good to finally be here, eh? It sure is. Night, Charlie. Hope you sleep well. You too, kiddo. You too. End of chapter 4. Dun 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 dun.